pleasure for me, Andres Rodriguez from Ecuador, to present this program and to collaborate with other English teachers, language instructors, everybody in the world. They are sharing with us this webinar. So it's a good contribution that we offer for the EFL community. As our special guest, Manisha, says that we are going to interact. I will introduce her in a while. So thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. It will be a pleasure to share with you this webinar. No, I send my greetings for Professor Suber, Mr. Carlos, Vicky, Dr. Rita, Sol, Sonia, Mr. Daniel. All right. So I will start first with introducing Professor Manisha, who I have the pleasure to meet her the first time in the Global Educator Networks. No, so it's a pleasure to invite you, Dr. Manisha, because this is not the first time we begin with the webinar. So 3 years ago, we currently start with the webinars in terms of collaborating to English teachers, improve to make progress to improve then the quality of their teaching classes. So it's a pleasure for me uh, to introduce you. You are the founder and director of the online World of Learning in Commonwealth in Pennsylvania, and you have written some publications. You're part of MEX-TESOL Journal, and you also presented a cognitive linguistic study. So it's okay, Dr. Professor Manisha, thanks for coming. And tell me, how are you, and what did you choose this topic for sharing with us?
Writing, actually, my PhD is in a very different field. My PhD is in second language acquisition of prepositions, but I've been teaching at Temple University since 2010, and part of my job was to develop English for academic purposes, skills, and train students to be able to study the university. And these were all international students. One of the courses that I taught for ever since I started was writing, academic writing. I could do writing pretty well, pretty okay. I would say I wasn't ever an expert at it. But teaching writing was a very big challenge. So gradually, as I was learning to teach writing, I learned to figure it out layer by layer. It's a very deep skill. I think every skill is deep, but I was particularly very interested in teaching writing. And it's my years of work learning with my students. I wasn't teaching them, I was learning with them. And I've come up with these small observations, but those observations made a big difference in my students' lives. And one of the things that I discovered rather accidentally, very recently, is how bilingual students, work in my class. And I'm just presenting something that I observed in my class. So translanguaging is not really a new field, but we were not able to openly talk about it because we had monolingual standard pedagogical goals, and that sort of suppressed ability to allow students to think in more than one language. But as one of my students was using it in class, and I had a brief conversation with her about why did she use her first language, how did it make her feel about it, was she better in control of her writing? The answers to all those questions was positive. I delved into it, I did some study, I did some research, and it's a fascinating world.
It sounds very great. It sounds very good because I've been observing your work and your presentations when you present dissertations about those topics. Well, so we can start up in this moment. You can use your slides, Dr. Manisha.
Let me try sharing. I thought I wasn't able to share.
It's okay. I think that we can see it.
Okay, right. As I said, I would like it to be very interactive, and you'll find questions on some of my slides. So please work with me. Let's try and have a little conversation. This is what I have observed my students in my writing class. They are happy in the reading class. They are happy in the listening and speaking class. There are so many other types of courses that our students have to attend, being a part of Temple University English language program, but it's particularly this writing, which is so overwhelming and daunting, and it's such a torture for my students. Does anybody share these feelings with me? Do you feel like your students either are scared of writing or just hate writing altogether? You could turn on your microphone, talk, or send your responses in the chat. I'll wait for your responses.
Can I share my insight, Manisha?
Please.
Well, in my experience, well, in secondary, in high schools, and even when we major some careers in university, and you teach a specific English for a specific purpose, no, writing is seen as a little bit boring. So I'm honest. Some students don't like to write, and that's not because they simply don't like to write. Maybe they don't know that what is the theory behind the practice. For example, writing is not simply trying to decoding ideas in your mind and then texting. No. I think writing is it's a process. No, it's a process in your mind that comes first with an idea. You can brainstorm. You can pick it up some of the ideas, and then you can reduce or limit to a specific topic, or you can give them the chance to use the free writing. No, when things that comes to their mind, they can write it. So there are many different writing styles, for students, especially for beginners or intermediate. On the other hand, we have the advanced writing. The advanced writing is more academic, no? So students, they need how to connect ideas, the main idea, how to illustrate or present an argument. So writing is a whole elaboration. So it's holistically, because you need to know semantics, you need to know grammar, you need to convey ideas. No, so that's my experience.
Absolutely. It's all of that. Any other ideas? Is there anybody? All right, let me flip the question. Is there anybody, any instructor among us today who can confidently say that she or he noticed that there are some students enthusiastic about writing? They're hopping and frolicking in the class, and they say, "Yay, we have a writing class." Any experience there?
Daniel have already is sharing with us now something that we have to use strategies to make the students more interesting about writing. Yes, that's what I already shared with you, Manisha. So it's very interesting that teachers apply different strategies or methodologies for students to start writing. So maybe some teachers use the prompts, to follow in class, so they teach them how to write. But it's more important to model and to explain why. So the purpose of writing, not just writing because they have to write. And so giving a purpose to students, and they can do it better. No.
Absolutely, I agree. And one of the biggest problems with writing is when we expect writing to be done in a second language. That's when it becomes even harder than it actually is. These are realities. There's a lot of work that has been done in these aspects. We as teachers see it, feel it firsthand. And these are what our students, our bilingual students or emerging bilingual students go through every single day. For example, the first point, that first language is not academically strong enough to support in any way. And this is a very important point, because we now believe that if reading and writing were stronger skills in the first language, those skills are easily transferable. It's just that you change the code, but the skills that you have acquired are universally applied. But the problem is, we are expecting our young students to write too soon. They're not mature enough to function in a particular language, not because they don't know the language, not only that, but this is a skill that has not been developed either in their first language or in their second language. That's one of the biggest disadvantages for them. And when they come to school, they are expected to do a whole lot of skills, to show a whole lot of skills in their classrooms. But the problem is there are gaps in the second language. Also, because some students learn at different paces. It's not like a math formula. You put a formula on the board and one formula can solve a lot of equations. That's not how language works. It's an emerging skill, and everybody learns it at different paces. So you find big gaps, big learning gaps. On top of that, those academic skills that students are expected to learn inside 1 year is a big learning curve. That's a lot of torture there on students. And as Andreas was saying, writing is not only about putting ideas down on the paper. Writing is a very abstract skill. You don't have anything on paper until you start writing. Everything is in the mind. Everything is in the mental space, and that requires training of mind, how you think about those ideas one by one. But think in what language, first or second? I think Western world should begin to take the blame a little bit, that we rolled out this think in English or think in a second language or think in the target language goals to the point where we almost overlooked the other important resource that students do bring with them, and that is their first language. We completely overlook the fact that first language or thinking in first language could actually support writing in the second language. And that's what translanguaging is all about. But when you look at curriculum expects you to move from stage 1 to stage 2 and makes writing or reading or any skill for that matter more and more advanced. But does the proficiency in the language advance at the same rate as academic expectations? They don't really meet. They're not at par with each other. And that explains a whole lot of our misery. The second language is not acquired as quickly as these skills are expected to be acquired. So there's a complete lack of, I would say, coordination there. But still, we are forcing our students to think in English, to write in English, to do everything in English. And that is writing for us. And for the longest time, to confess, I'm also a product of that school of thought where if you don't allow people or students to talk in English or to think in English, then their English will not improve. I was a product of that thought. But things are slowly changing for me because when I go into the classroom, my eyes are open, my ears are open. I notice how students struggle when I force them to do everything in the language, which actually is not even strong enough for those skills. And how this particular interest grew in me is I had a South Korean student in my class, and she would take some time to produce her paragraphs, to produce a writing assignment, and I was very curious. So I went up to her and I said, your work is really good, but how do you go about it? You take time. Sometimes you don't meet deadlines. What's going on? Is there any way I can help you? And this is her story. It's very simple, it's very short, but it's powerful. She came at a very advanced levels of writing. I teach the highest level of writing at my university, in my department, and she tested into that class directly, and she said, I know I'm at very advanced level of writing, but I cannot think in English as well as I can think in my first language, which is Korean. So what I do is I first frame my ideas in my first language, and then I slowly reorganize or rethink about these ideas in English. It gives me a better control of my thought, of my content, and my organization. And that's where when I heard this for the first time, I was like, this is cheating. But I didn't react on that in the class. I went back home, I did some research, and voila, I came across translanguaging, which is a growing pedagogical aspect of our field. So there you go. If it's helping her produce good work, and she's honest about it, and she's relying on her first language, I see why that should be a problem. Is everybody doing okay? Am I going too fast? Is there any question? Do you want me to slow down? Okay, I think there are no questions. All right. Translanguaging, I was briefly talking to Professor John at the beginning. Um, it's not a jargon. It's a very simple concept, which means you use as many linguistic resources as you have at your disposal. So we are celebrating multilingualism, or we're celebrating the fact that you know so many languages or more than one language. And that's an asset, that's an advantage, that's not a disadvantage. If you can, like my student, if you can think better in your first language and then be able to say the same thing in English, even if it is grammatically not correct all the time, I think that should be the first important step in writing, that we allow translanguaging as a resource, as a pedagogical tool, both for teachers and for students. That's only going to make life so much easier. Writing, which is an abstract skill, which Andrea said, it has so many aspects to it. It's just going to make writing so much easier to deal with. And then again, I have a question on that slide. Translanguaging means switching between languages, using the language that can work best for you. Is there a problem? I'll pause for responses. Is there a problem using two languages or relying on the first language to get the job done? Okay, no responses.
Well,
I'm not.
I don't
I-
think that is a
okay.
problem, but there is one thing that we have to respond sometimes to an academic advisor or to a supervisor, and they ask you what is your pedagogical strategy, and sometimes they say I would like you to make a communicative approach, and when they say communicative approach, usually they say do not speak in other language more than English, only English. That's what they usually say. I used to work in an academy, an institute, and my supervisor, she says, do not engage in a Spanish conversation because they are learning English. They are not learning Spanish. And try to reduce the TTT, teacher talking time. So you have to try to make it all in English. That's what they say. So I don't know if this translanguaging must be seen as another pedagogical strategy, and maybe you have to try to make, I mean, if we have to respond to someone, a supervisor or an academic advisor, we have to explain that we would like to see if this method is useful to our students. So I consider that's the only thing that you have to take into account.
Absolutely, Carlos. I agree. And in response to my own question, is there a problem? I actually have four problems, and you hit the nail on its. You hit the nail on its head. That was my fourth problem. It's the archaic perception about language acquisition and therefore pedagogy, that if you want to fix something, if you want to fix the second language or nurture the second language, then that must be the only language you speak in. But does anybody remember Jim Cummins? I'm going to type out that name in my chat box. Just give me a minute. Is a great scholar. I feel like my chats are not going through. Did you see my chat?
Yeah, well, Manisha, we are looking for translanguages as an empowering tool.
Yes, no, I just sent something in a chat. Jim Cummins
Okay, yes.
He's a Canadian scholar, who his life's work is all about how whether you use first language or you use second language, it's like one big balloon, like a head. That balloon just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It doesn't matter which way you put the language in or which way you put the resources in. But I know it takes a whole lot of time for these administrations and non-academic staff to wake up and realize that we are doing something wrong. So the communicative approach is it's not a wrong approach, but it's a very first language sort of approach. You can have a communication in the language when you know that language. When you don't know the language, there's only very little communication you can have in that, and that's a reality. That's just the practical truth of our classroom. So to answer this question, there are four problems that come to my mind. One is the politics of language, and I don't think I need to dive deeper into it. English is a lingua franca. English is the strongest language. Everybody's rushing to learn it, and we fear that if we don't introduce English too early, then my kid or my student will not learn it because of, again, that old school thought that there is I forget the term, there is a critical period beyond which language cannot be learned. We've already come way far away from such theories. We live in a new world where we've proved that a bilingual brain is capable of learning any number of language because of how elastic and plastic it remains for the rest of the life. Yes, children are better at learning language. So, John, you don't need to worry about your girl, because children are like monkeys. They're like sponges. They just copy everything they learn. Like adults, they don't worry about grammar or, the technicalities of it. And they just learn it. They're just better learners. But that doesn't make us adults any way incapable of learning language. So we need to keep talking about these old theories and, try to experiment with new ideas. The curriculum of language seems like they take language like a linear order. First you learn this, first you learn that. There's a whole lot of things, other factors that are not considered in the curriculum of language or by the curriculum designers, like the home environment. If a student comes from parents, or if a student comes from a household where English is not spoken, used at all, English will take longer time, because then that kid gets only 8 hours of school education versus a kid whose parents are bilinguals too, and they often try to speak to the kid in English, or there is exposure to English by other means. The kid is going to be a little better or stronger at English and earlier too. So these are the factors that curriculum does not take into consideration. And that's why I think a teacher has a very important role to play in the classroom, and that is, what is best for my students? I think every classroom should have, I don't know if it does give you freedom to decide. A little bit of freedom is a good thing. So Carlos, if you have a freedom to choose, small things, small adjustments you can make in your classroom, do give it a shot. Administrators don't really know how language teaching works. You're the boss of your classroom. Here is what translanguaging, or here is what allowing students to have two languages can be so empowering. When you are already able to think in one language, you have figured out the way, you know how the world in your language works, thinking for writing becomes easier. Writing is abstract. You need to think about content. You need to think about a whole lot of things, as Andrea said at the beginning. Thinking for writing, if you allow your students to use the first language to do that kind of thing, alleviates that little hang up or little hiccup, like, oh my God, I have to think in English. But if you tell your kids, why don't you, for the first 5 minutes, warm up with the topic in your first language and see how it goes. It has social communicative advantage. That means a student doesn't feel alienated. It doesn't feel like it's doing a whole new set of skills in a whole new language. There is a little bit of familiarity with the task, given that the student is using the first language, the language that he or she knows very well. Executive functions. Writing is not just using language. It also brings with it a whole lot of executive functions, which is thinking about structure, thinking about audience, thinking about the context. These are, again, the abstract anchors of writing. Now, when you are not good at second language and you are expected to do a whole lot of these other decision making in the second language, it becomes even harder. So see, thinking in, allowing students to think in first language, to do some of these brainstorming thing, which is a part of my next slide, makes life so much easier, so much comfortable for our learners. And through this presentation, I want to talk about each of these 3 aspects of translanguaging, both for learners and for teachers. Before I move on, if there are any questions, you could start typing them out. Let's look at the first advantage that we have. Doing brainstorming, giving some students who are not really strong at English may require bilingual instruction. So explaining the writing prompt, both first in English and looking at their faces and say, 2 of my students did not understand it in English. Let me try rephrasing it in their first language and see if everybody understands it better the second time. So rather than repeating the instruction in English the second time, it might help other students who are not really good at English if you repeated the instruction in their first language. Having students talk with each other or brainstorm with each other, little bit of English, little bit of first language, it's okay. It's okay. We don't want to make them feel like, no, first language is not allowed in this class. But we're saying, well, we're learning English. Try and use English most of the time. But if there are some things you can do better in your first language, or it just you feel like using your first language at some point during your discussion, that's fine. That's okay. Pre-writing, I did experiment with this also. I had an Arabic student, again, a very advanced learner, but there was this one topic that was difficult for him. So I said, why don't you brainstorm in Arabic? So by brainstorming, I meant he's not going to write the whole essay, of course, I'm not going to accept it, but he would just think about ideas and write those ideas down in Arabic, in the first language. And then that did make it easier. It did not completely help him totally, because there were some other issues going on there. The topic was new to him. It was too technical, but his first language gave him a little bit of buffer to deal with it. It seemed like it made him a little bit more confident. Sorry, I was reading the question. Rough drafts, not the full-length drafts, but rough drafts, thinking aloud, problem solving, all of those can be done in first language. I learned from my students who came from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. So their schools are sort of not intentionally, but the instruction is done in bilingual. It uses bilingual instruction. So it's fascinating how they do it. The professor explains a concept in Arabic and the students produce their work in English. And I thought that was interesting. That was an example of translanguaging. Whether the teacher is using the second language or the students are using a different language, it doesn't matter. But as long as in the classroom setting, you're allowing students to hear a different language, produce in a different language, or vice versa, that's perfectly all right. So see, it's a reality of the world when your dominant language is different from the language you're expected to produce work in, there will be a little friction, there will be a little clash. And teachers across the globe have figured out the way to find a balance between dealing with the first language proficiency and also pumping up the proficiency in the second language. So it's happening. It's going on in the world. It's not like it's a new concept. It just needs to be formalized more. It just needs to be discussed more so that we don't have to sort of fight against the administration to make it happen. Peer reviews, feedback, meta talk. So when teacher is explaining a response to a question, sometimes she or he can use little bit of Spanish here and there. It's all right. It's not forbidden. But yes, I know, as Carlos said, the administration would be definitely upset if you conducted instruction in Spanish. But a little bit of Spanish here and there should not be forbidden. It's not a crime, because you are supporting your student. You're not hampering their learning. First language should be seen as a support system to rely on. But as long as it doesn't come in their way of doing or functioning in second language, it should be at a moderate level. Sonia, you have a question. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. No, it's not a question. Once in a seminar, I learned that when people hear a language that is not the original language, our brain shocks. For example, if I listen to French, my brain is going to enter into a shock, and my brain is going to flee. So maybe the explanation can our partner, the workmate, give to the principal, because if the students listen to English and they don't have any idea what are we talking about, they are going to enter in shock, and they are going to want to escape. So that is an explanation. That's why I totally agree that sometimes L1 is a resource, recurse or resource. Yes, that's okay. Yeah, it's a resource for us, because this is how brain works, I guess. I don't know. So I totally understand, and this is um, slow. Learning a language is a process. So in the first stages, I guess we had to give a little instructions in the L1, so things be clear. I don't know. That's why I heard, and I wanted to communicate to the workmate so he can give an explanation to the principal that maybe they don't have any of this knowledge. Okay, they maybe they reproduce what they hear, but this is something that is confirmed in a scientific way. I don't know. That is my contribution. Thanks.
Thank you, Sonia. Absolutely, absolutely. When you don't understand instructions given in a different language, it's not just an element of shock. There's an element of confusion. You have no idea what you're supposed to do. But if they know what they're supposed to do, I think they will be able to perform better at that task. So for clarifications, for support, for resource, first language can be empowering. Absolutely. So I totally agree with you. Thank you for such a brilliant point, Carlos.
Okay, I would like to make a comment about this because something came to mind. When I was in the university, we were talking and learning about the different methods of learning English. And I remember one teacher told us about the universal grammar translation method. And it has some similarity with translanguaging, but I remember that this professor, he said the universal grammar translation method was applied in the 1960s, 1970s, and it it has expired because the students they tend to see more about the first language, and they don't need to see the first language, they need to forget. And that well, he mixed the part, the history, the sociology. He said that when you are learning a language, you have to uh, take the culture of the language. So if you are learning English, American English, you have to Americanize yourself. So if you see the grammar, the universal grammar translation method, you are going back, and you have to leave your culture and acquire the new one. So that's what he told us in the university. I would like to see what is your approach, what's your point of view about this.
So universal grammar was not an approach. It was actually Chomsky's theory, and that theory slowly became a theory of second language acquisition. I don't really know at what point of time it became a translation approach. It was never a translation approach, but universal grammar was Chomsky's linguistic theory. And unfortunately, your professor is partly correct about it. So universal grammar had very bizarre aspects of language, and there was a switch on and off. So when your professor said that you have to adopt a culture in order to learn that language, that's crazy. I mean, that's not really, then nobody would have become a bilingual. You know what I mean? Being a bilingual does not mean having perfect English, or for me, being a perfect Spanish speaker. It's about being able to function in 2 different languages or 3 different languages, right? Of course, being successful academically requires a different level of language. And as Sonia was saying, language is a learning process. You learn it slowly. Do first language learners not continue learning into their college years? Of course they do. They have to learn to write the whole new system of English when they go to university. Is that not considered learning? Yes. So nobody can ever be perfect at any one language. You know, particularly, you don't expect bilinguals to be perfect. So universal grammar was a linguistic theory, which did not really, had nothing to do with pedagogy. It was a theory which was almost inspired by the way computers are coded today, you know, like zero, there's a binary code, there's either 0 or 1, and that's how you figure out the computer codes, but that's not how brain works. So if you know anything about universal grammar, you should know that it was culturally, semantically alienated. That means Chomsky looked at language in the brain, but he did never care about language in the community or language in the society to make meaning. And that was its biggest defect. Chomsky's concern was language as a structure, not language as a meaning. So that theory, of course, had to die because it did not have, even linguists today do not accept Chomsky's theory of universal grammar. So definitely it has no role to play in a classroom. But thanks for asking that question, Carlos. So on this slide, I have few more questions. And I was talking about how at different stages of writing, whether that is pre-writing, brainstorming, figuring out the topic, or that's actually, you know, sitting down, drafting ideas, putting down points on paper, or teacher feedback, at different stages of writing, first language should be allowed to use, can be allowed to use, should is a very, very strong word, I would say, can be allowed to use to promote learning, to allow students to feel comfortable with writing, because there's a whole lot of new skills that you learn when you learn to write. And then on the other side, I have a few questions. If we could answer some of these questions. I don't know, there are some links. I have no idea what those links are.
For a textbook, he was recommending a textbook or talking about a textbook.
Oh, I see. I agree, Rita. Absolutely right. It's such a, we make language learning so frustrating. You have no idea how many students have, second language students have dropped out of IELP courses in the United States because of this second language mandate. They're not mature enough to do all the academic work in the second language because they've never done it. You know, they come from different communities, different contexts, and when they come in English, in an English language speaking country, they go crazy. They're like, give me a break. So at least in the classroom, we can support them, we can help them. All right.
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? What is the best advice for when you observe the students drop out in any course in university or high school when they are going to learning new language, in this case, English?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
is the best advice that you're going to give us for when you observe the students throughout the classes, the English classes in this case? What we are going to do for engage the student, and is in occasion they don't come to the class anymore because in occasion they are a little confused, frustrated, and something like that. But what is the best advice that you are going to do for us?
I would actually, some of this, what I'm going to say, comes up in my next slide. So Saul, did I pronounce your name correctly? Saul?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Saul, so Saul's question is, what are some of the strategies so students are more engaged in the class, in the English language classroom particularly, so they don't drop out, they come to class, they sort of continue learning. So although these points are more focused on the writing, but I think they apply anywhere. When there is too much pressure on the brain from two different sides, one is achieving a task or completing a task to get a grade, but then you're also forced to think in a different language, but you're not capable or strong enough as yet, then I would say modifying the task and allowing students a good idea that just controls the affective filter. You know, there's when there is too much challenge, the brain shuts off. So don't give them too much challenge in the first day or first few months. Either modify the task by saying, all right, you do only small portion of this task and today, and then do the rest of it tomorrow. That's one way of doing it. You differentiate your pedagogy so that the student feels comfortable for first few weeks, first few months, whatever it is, and gradually increase the demand both or increase the challenge both in terms of the tasks that a student has to do or the language in which you expect. So expectations can become can change as you feel that the student is becoming more and more comfortable with the class. So, did that help?
Thank you so much, because I observe the many adult people in occasion they are be afraid because I am an adult people or elderly people. I can go to study English. It's a little difficult for us, la la la. But nowadays I observe young people that do that, and then I'm a little afraid because they think not with me, with another teacher say, no, I am confused. I don't want to study anymore, and they left and say, oh my God. I am a little sad because I am English teacher, but in not that subject. I am going to teach in another subject, and then I am feel sad. I am feel blue for my students because it could be if my student left the courses is too much student for me. Thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah, I think modifying the task or allowing students to work their way. You know, we've been talking about collaborative tasks also. You can have 2 students or 3 students allowing students to work together can sometimes be meaningful. So because you have 2 brains doing the same task, which can be very challenging for an individual student. That's another very important discussion we can have some other time. But how translanguaging can also help students navigate through the writing process is through those executive functions that are already in place in their first language. They can do a whole lot of problem solving. They can think about the topic, think about the purpose, and make those decisions in their first language, it doesn't seem that alienated. It doesn't seem that difficult when one part of it has been taken care of, which is the language. But if you ask them to do everything in English, then of course they are going to run away, and they're always going to hate writing. So little by little, we have to make them feel comfortable. This is very important. And Saul, this was another part of your, this could be another part of your question, that is differentiated pedagogy. And translanguaging allows us to do so much of it, where we can modify instructions, we can modify tasks. As I already said, instead of using English all the time, we can sometimes explain difficult tasks or break it down into steps in their first language. We can accept some sentences in English and some sentences in their first language, with the promise that by the end of this year, the student should be able to produce everything in English. So set a goal for yourself, because this bilingual text may not be acceptable for a long time. But in the beginning, I think it is all right. So we can differentiate we can modify tasks. We can do a whole lot of things. There are some weaker students who need more support, both linguistically and cognitively. And, you know, we can allow language to be a resource for them. So I'm gonna leave this slide on for a few minutes, for a few seconds, so that you're able to read everything that's on there, because on the next slide, I have a few fill in the blanks for us to do. So I ended this slide by saying, there is no end to possibilities. And I want you to give me some suggestions as to what else can we do, so that our students, as Saul said, do not run away or do not give up on learning English as a second language, or do not give up learning to write, because it's a very important skill.
Hi.
Sonia.
Help them. For example, when I am teaching, they say it's difficult, miss, I don't know English, I have no idea, or maybe they joke because of the anxiety. Actually, yesterday they had an exposition and there was a girl that was shaking. So I said, why are you shaking if I never grade you under 6? So help them. If I give them a grade under 6, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, they are going to be terrified of the language. So I try to help them, and when they have to write on the board, they say, Miss, I don't know. Don't worry, I help you. And actually, I do. I help them to write the words. So I guess here in Ecuador, some teachers make them be afraid of the language, make them scared of the language. And that is not the correct way, because this is a language that you have to love. So we have to make them love the language, so they can improve their skills. So for me, that's it. So it's about the help of the teacher and the confidence that the teacher can provide in the classroom.
I am actually typing out your suggestion. Sonia, is this what your suggestion was?
Oh, I had to summarize. Help them and make them feel confident. Don't scare them of the language. don't be so grammar freak, because in reality, English is a language that breaks the grammar rules. If you listen to a song or you watch a sitcom, most of them don't follow grammar rules. So sometimes my workmates um, maybe students fail the test because of grammar rules. So that watch that sitcom and they are not even using the auxiliary.
Yeah, Sonia, absolutely. I call those teachers grammar Nazis. They focus too much on grammar and they point out every small mistake and they say, why is this wrong? Why is this wrong? Why is this preposition wrong? Who cares? As long as the message is clear, as long as the meaning is clear, I think grammar should come last. John, do you want to explain your KISS principle? Keep it simple and silly.
Yeah. This comes from in architecture. Again, I'm an architect, and I'm a I guess a amateur linguist and a teacher of English for more than 14 years. And so keep it simple, silly. Don't overcomplicate things. I was glad to hear you mentioning brainstorming. In design education, you use a lot of brainstorming when you're creating new ideas for possibilities. But in the same way, you could use a structural model for education in writing. And so I posted the link from that I used several years ago, I think 2010 or something, in Riobamba. I taught a course for let's see, Universidad San Francisco de Quito. Yeah, USFQ, but it was through their ELA campus in Riobamba, and it was a college composition course, and we used this 5-paragraph essay, and that was the first time I taught English comp, and so it was a new task, and I thought, well, how am I going to go about this? And it was a really simple, straightforward book and structure, and I liked it because I could just use my hand and say, okay, well, you have a topic sentence, you have support idea 1, support idea 2, support idea 3, and your conclusion or your summation, and then that can build into a 5-paragraph essay. And it was really a nice text to kind of demystify the writing experience and process. Andreas knows, as I taught the 4 skills course, the TOEFL course, I consider writing the kind of the pinnacle of the skills, in that it's so cerebral, so cognitive, but you have to get it out. And so I think brainstorming is a really essential tool in that regard. So yeah, I don't really know. I'm just kind of throwing in some random things here, but I think to help students, if you give them the structure and it's very simple, they can use their hand for it, that can at least get them writing, get something down. It doesn't matter. Again, I was glad to hear you don't appreciate the grammar Nazis. Neither do I. I had my Warner's book, English Composition and Grammar by Dr. Warner. That's from high school, and no one goes through through life with these books. Oh, did I split an infinitive there? What did I do wrong? Come on, we don't speak that way. And so I think giving students permission to just put something down, and then they can make something with it. And so yeah, I like the comment, do not overcomplicate tasks or work for students. So don't make it too, I mean, again, the KISS principle, keep it simple, silly. There's another way you could say it's stupid, but you don't want to say stupid. So keep it silly, keep it simple, silly. But I think there's truth to that. So I'll listen to your comments on my reflections.
Absolutely, can't agree more. I think we take the life out of education when we put too much stress on grades, too much stress on performance too early. I think we forget to have fun with students. And one thing that we must never forget, that in the classroom, you're also a learner, because your students are constantly teaching you to adjust your language, adjust your attitude towards them. And if you don't consider yourself a learner, then you'll always be a teacher and you'll never learn. So I mean, you gotta that's the silly aspect of students, is you bring in a joke. I had a professor who used to teach us modernist poetry. Of course, we were adults at that time, but he knew that his students would be half dead at 7:30 in the morning for this modernist poetry boring classroom. So he was a professor at a prestigious university. He would do something silly, like John used the word silly, in every class. One time he wore this clown hat or whatever. I mean, he would dress up funny so that he could get our attention. He would do stupid, crazy things, like he'll pile up books on the desk and sit right on top of that pile and do meditation first 5 minutes of the class. As teachers, you are always design thinkers. You can never run out of ideas. And I don't care what the administration thinks about it, but you are the teacher. It is your responsibility to make the learning happen. So do whatever it suits your students. Their needs are far more important than anything else. Any other thoughts? Any other ideas?
Yes, please, dear partners. So in this moment, during Manisha's presentation, you will sharing your insights, ideas. So good job. Now, so if you have any question, please, this is the moment.
All right, maybe not now, but if you would like to stay in touch, I will share my LinkedIn with you guys. Why is it not going? Yeah, okay. You guys can connect with me and we will keep discussing. There's so much to discuss. There's so much to learn and talk about. I really appreciate Andreas's patience. I got really busy last week. I was just wrapping up the semester. He was very patient with me. He gave me extra time. But it was such a great honor and pleasure to meet the teachers on this side of the planet. I know very few teachers in the Latin America side. I know Andreas, I know Rita, and a couple of others, but I guess the need is the same everywhere, is to make students successful and not to scare them away. So yeah, it's the
You
same
say
problem.
the key is simple, no? The key is principle, no? Make it simple.
You know what, John? We have Design Thinking Education Conference every May and November. I
Okay.
would really, really appreciate it if you could present it's a teachers conference, like it's very simple.
Mhm.
People come and they
Sure.
talk. I don't want you to make it too complicated. It's not academic. It's
Yeah.
by teachers and it is for teachers. So
Sure.
I would like to personally invite you and
Okay.
elaborate on this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
this aspect of
Yeah.
content.
Well, the idea of design design is an iterative process,
Design
and
thinking.
Donald Schoen, SCHO umlauts N, came up with the idea of the reflective practitioner. We're talking about architects again. So design being a reflective practice, and that design iterations are iterative. And so if you use this like a spiral, but maybe going upward and each time improving, hopefully a little bit, and it's an iterative. Yeah. And so that's the model that I've used for years in design, but it also works interdisciplinary. My research is interdisciplinary in nature. And so I think these domains can help in other areas. And rather than I don't really subscribe to silo thinking of academics areas, but I've always been an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary person. And as an architect, you kind of have to be, because your training requires so many things, from science to the humanities to human scale and motion and wayfinding, all these things that are involved in the built environment that require complex approaches. And so I think design thinking is kind of my default, but it's becoming a lot more popular.
Yeah, we have at Online World of Learning, we have promised design thinking education, and Rita was a part of it in the beginning. I think she still is a part of it. And so you're more than welcome.
Okay. Well, yeah, let me give you my email. I'll show it for the group of everyone. If they want to get in touch with me as well.
And are you on LinkedIn? If you're on LinkedIn, you can.
I am, but I don't know my LinkedIn link, so I'm just going to give you my WhatsApp. These are my WhatsApp numbers. That's the Ecuador number, and then I have one for the U.S. Let's see, 785-130-359. Yeah, so those are both WhatsApp. I like WhatsApp. It's free. It's ubiquitous here in Latin America. Not as many gringos use it as much, but some are. But you know, it's a slow. I think it's
I
a
don't have your text.
Oh, you don't? Oh, okay. Oh, I sent it to Rita. I'm sorry. Let me I'm gonna try this again. Let me send it to everyone. Okay, let's try that.
Yes, now we can see it.
Okay. Yeah. All righty. So, Earl, Andres, what do you think? I was kind of thinking, last thought here. I was thinking, when I first came to Ecuador, the idea that was, you don't use Spanish in the English classroom, period. You know, slap your hand if you do that, you know. And I saw a lot of, a lot of training in the high schools and schools. It was a lot more. There was a lot more Spanish spoken in English classrooms. What's your take on this polemic idea? Is it? What do you think? Do you think it's correct or incorrect to use? And I'll ask our presenter as well. I mean, I probably have an idea what her answer would be, but I'm kind of curious because I've kind of come full circle on this whole idea of what you use in your language class. Okay, Andres, and then our presenter.
So yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I will answer in this way. So I will explain Manisha, because Manisha maybe she doesn't know the context now in Ecuador. So in Ecuador, Manisha, no, so we are we are an EFL country, so English as a foreign language. So what does it mean? That in the public schools, English is not mandatory, especially in the elementary level. So there are some, in the city we have some schools, and outside the city we have some rural areas that are far away. So they only have one teacher for a number group of students. So it means that teacher has to be expert in mathematics, in English, and so other subjects. No, so and that teacher is not an English language teacher. So he teaches English the basics. No, so for the students to know the basic, the background, he or she doesn't speak English. So and that's the question that Professor Sewer is making about. So why don't they speak English? And the reason is this: because some instructors are not experts in the language instruction. It's different, for example, in private schools, no, in big cities and small towns, that they are language instructors. They studied for being ESL or EFL teachers, and they are experts in the subject, and they can speak English. So that's the difference that you can see in balance. Why some students don't speak English in terms of linguistics forms, rather than other public in public schools, no? So you see the difference, no? And that problem makes that instructors or language teachers prefer use the mother tongue, so which is a Spanish, no? Or they combine, both, no? So they speak English sometimes, or they change to Spanish or give instructions in Spanish, because students in public schools, they don't have the vocabulary enough to understand. So, and that's and I can understand it that way, you know?
Interesting. So English becomes a foreign language also if it's sort of in curriculum introduced only in the latter half of the middle school. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, it is. It
Okay.
is. It's included in the curriculum. Okay, in all the courses. No, from the elementary until the last course when they graduate. No, so
Oh my God. Hold on. So English is introduced in the elementary classes? Then
English.
how is it a foreign language?
is-
Then it's almost like a second language. But here's my other question. Are other subjects taught in English or Spanish?
Well, no, specifically as a second language. No. I mean is that English is considered a foreign language in the curriculum. So what does it mean? That in the curriculum, English has weekly hours, no? For example, 5 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours per course or per. Okay, so it's determined by an average number of hours, no, in the curriculum. So at the end of the year, it's supposed the student have to develop a profile, no, a linguistic profile. But honestly, it's difficult. It's difficult and struggling because of the problems that I explained you before. You know that teachers use both languages, so students, it's difficult that they reach that profile. No, but we tried it harder. We tried it harder, and we are working so hard. So, in currently the American Embassy, in accordance to the Ministry of Education, they are implementing programs for preparing teachers more linguistically and students too. So how are this proposal is improving to the progress of the students? Because teachers have more hours, no more hours, they have more preparation, and they can use more strategies to help those students, no? Especially the student with lower proficiency, and the ones that they need more input, no? You know that.
Got it. That explains a lot. Okay. Thank you, Andreas, for that explanation.
The
Anyway,
problem is longer, miss. I
yeah,
think it's longer. The problem has a, is a context that is a little complicated. First, the English teachers in Ecuador, we have a modern outlook just some years ago when there was a president that I don't want to introduce politics here, but he brought the need for the teachers to have a high level. So he said that the English teachers they need the level B2, at least the level B2. And most of the English teachers didn't have the level B2. And there was a kind of controversial movement, and the English teachers, most of them, they didn't want to take international exams, and some of the teachers have to become to prepare, and they have to make more years of the studying. They have to make a master degree, and some master degrees they were not accepted because they can study the master degree. But imagine that was the problem. A master degree of English in Spanish, and some to enter to the master degree they didn't have the level B2. They were accepted with the level B1 or the level A2. So the problem is huge. And besides these methods of KISS, that Mr. John was telling us is that we have to apply, because in the high school, if you let's say that you say that a student does not need to go to the other level or the other class, you need to have proof, evidence. And if you don't have the evidence, if you haven't collected evidence, that student cannot uh, fail. You have to pass the students. Most of the students pass because we have a kind of philosophy of laissez-faire, laissez-passer. So that philosophy, and if you don't want to be in problem, if you don't want to get into trouble, you have to pass most students. If they don't, you have to look for a kind of response, objective tests and things like that, so the students pass to the other level, because English is just another subject. When the
Yeah.
students, they really want to learn English, they go to an institute or an academy to learn English, because in the high schools it's just another subject, and we have many things to say, to discuss about that, but that can be for another day. Thank you.
I'm sure. Yes, absolutely. And Carlos, it's not just in Ecuador, but in many other countries also English is mostly it's just ended up being another subject. It's not treated like a language, it's just become a subject where you transfer knowledge about grammar or about something else, but that's the most unfortunate part of not being able to make a distinction between teaching a language versus teaching other content area subjects. But as you said, this is for another day. I'm sorry, I'm not doing this on purpose. I have no idea why my camera has decided to shut down itself. But it was really, really awesome interacting with you, talking with you. Until we meet again, happy life, enjoy your summer, and looking forward to talking to you guys again some other time.
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so much.
teacher Manisha. Before we finish, dear professors, teachers, let me invite you for the next webinars that we are going to have in the coming weeks. No, I will be sharing with you in the different groups. No, so Mr. Carranza, no, are you from Ecuador? Yes.
Yes, sir, I am from Puerto Viejo, Manabi.
Okay, great, great, from Manabi, great. No, so I don't know in what WhatsApp group, because EFL groups are so many, but I will invite, and I hope to hopefully expect to see you. Professor Sewer, we are going to keep talking. Manisha too.
Sure.
Have a nice weekend, everybody, and thanks for coming. Vanesita, hello. Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.